Hello, everyone, and welcome to Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. My name's Brandon Adams. Sometimes I like to give you kind of the anchor, you know, the hand.
Is that the Darth
We have
Vader
been doing
force?
really well at Starting Dog Nation Daily, pretty close to on time this week. Not as well today with Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, but that's probably my fault. Nonetheless, I am really glad to be in your company, Jeff Sintel. Really excited about a lot of recruiting information on today's program. We will hear later on from four-star offensive lineman Andrew Wren. He'll give us some details about his UGA visit, what he liked about that. The conversation continues to revolve a bit around five-star running back Kindle Milton. We will hear from him on today's show as well. But there is another guy, and a guy that, frankly, we haven't talked about a ton on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, whose recruitment seems to have accelerated quite a bit as of late, and Georgia would seem to be right in the middle of all of this. So, Jeff Sintel, let's talk for a moment about Corey Wren, a pretty interesting athlete out of the state of Louisiana, and a certainly speedy wide receiver. What can you tell us about Wren and the fact that we're actually leading the show off with him on a day in which you think some other names might be mentioned here?
All right, folks, let's get the picture here. Brandon has appetite for destruction in his brain. That's the show soundtrack. We're going to be on a quicksilver pace. We're going to rip through all these topics and all these segments. And why? Because we got Corey Wren on our mind right now. Corey Wren, a guy who told me has ran a 4.31 at a Mississippi State camp. The best laser 100 time on him was actually a 10.41. That was last year. Had a hamstring injury this spring to keep him from going as low as he possibly could. But Corey tells me, or Co-Savage, as folks will get to know him a little bit on the pages of dognation.com, Corey tells me he's got a 10.2 in him in the 100 meters when he's ripping and rolling and picking him up and putting him down as fast as he can. Now here's the nitty-gritty, Brandon. A lot of people are reporting two schools. It's actually three schools.
Okay.
And let me get a force choke on all the audience right here. What he's thinking about is he's thinking about Arizona State.
All right.
He's thinking about Georgia. And he's thinking about the nationally known track program at Houston.
Okay.
Underneath American Olympic icon Carl Lewis.
Okay.
Those are the things he's bantering back and forth about with his decision. And I guess 'tis the season for accelerated timelines, sir.
You know, it's kind of funny. Yeah, it's right. There have been a lot of these. We'll actually talk about three of those guys today, Wren included. And when you spoke to Wren, one of the things you had a chance to ask him about is because he is a speedy receiver, because he's not the biggest guy in the world, there's some comparisons they get made to now departed former Georgia wide receiver Mecole Hardman. And as far as those comparisons go, Wren all the way out in Louisiana, he has heard those. And frankly, he embraces the idea, at least to a certain extent, of being put in that category of Mecole Hardman. Here's what Corey Wren had to say to you about that.
The Bulldog fans tell me that all the time. And, you know, it's an honor, you know, to be even in the same conversation as that guy. You know, he's a very good player, speedy. Me and him has the same type of game. But really, you know, like you said, I really want to start my own destiny. I want to start my own trend, I would say. You know, like you said, I want to be the first Corey Wren. You know, I don't like to put myself in this category. You know, you guys call him a speed type receiver, but, you know, I don't try to put myself in this category. I'm just a speed type receiver. You know, I want to be able to be that speed receiver, but I also want to be able to, you know, high point a ball, you know, run through tackles. And, you know, I don't ever want to put myself in this category or, you know, limitate myself with anything.
Something that's really interesting from Wren there, he says, listen, I don't mind being compared to Mecole Hardman. I want to carve my own legacy. And at the same time, I don't want to be thought of as just a speedy receiver. I want to be thought of as a guy that can high point the ball. I want to be thought of a guy that essentially does all the things that wide receivers do. But here is where something else that Wren told you kind of came into this conversation, that apparently when Wren's had conversations with Georgia wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton's kind of laid out to him in very explicit terms, here's what we think you do well, presumably speed's a part of that, and here's what we still think you need to work on. And while some people might not necessarily love hearing that unfettered of an evaluation of a skill set, it sounds like that's actually one of the things that attracts Wren to UGA. Here is more from Wren on that subject.
One thing Coach Hankton stood out was he didn't sugarcoat anything with me. You know, he told me straight up, you know, my film it shows that I can run. Or, you know, I want you to come here and play receiver for me. You're not showing me really any catching. So, you know, he told me, like, you know, you come here, the speed is there. I can't teach speed, but one thing I can teach you is a route running, you know, consistent catching. You know, I really applaud that of him, you know, not sugarcoating nothing with me, not telling me. I don't like when people tell me, oh, you can come here and start right away. you could be the face of this program. I just don't feed into that. I'd rather come in knowing I have to work for something, knowing that I have to come in with a full head of steam. That's really something that I feel like separates me from a lot of people is my work ethic. Mm-hmm. And I have a strong work ethic, and I don't take no for an answer.
So he wants to come into Georgia. He wants to work, and it sounds like he thinks Hankton's going to provide him that opportunity. But to be completely honest with you, Jeff, when I hear Wren say those things, when I've had a chance to talk to you about this a little bit, I'm looking forward to reading your piece at DogNation.com about this. What I get the impression of is Georgia does like him because he does have world-class track star type speed, but as a receiver, which is likely the position he will play in college, he is a little bit of a project. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say, but you got to remember, he plays, if you look at those clips, he plays from one of the stoutest programs in the state of Louisiana. A lot of those, breakaway plays, explosive plays you see on his highlight films there, those are him against some of the best teams in the state of Louisiana. John Curtis Christian, which is basically like a Grayson, a Valdosta in terms of the state of Louisiana. Make sure I use the term Valdosta there in its right place there. Well, they don't throw it around a lot. They run the veer. Mm-hmm. And look at him. He's 176 pounds. And what he's doing is he's running a lot between the tackles. You see a lot of jet sweeps here. And Brandon, I'll be completely honest. Georgia, if you follow this recruiting class and this board, everybody's a little bit too guilty of stargazing. We've talked about that on the Dog Nation forum this week. Put aside the fact that this is the number 30 athlete or a 3-star, maybe a number 500 player in the country. Realize this, Georgia does not have an electric lightning bolt 4-3 dude in this class yet. They don't. And that's what Georgia is recruiting for here. They're recruiting to fill a need for that Mecole Hardman type guy. And Brandon, I'm big on a player standing on his own. Everybody wants to be the first Corey Wren. Everybody wants to be the first Brandon Adams in whatever field or whatever lane of life you're in. That said, even though I put a lot of stock into that, I can't help but look at Corey Wren and think of the Bowman Bullet and Mecole Hardman. Remember, Mecole played quarterback for Elbert County in Bowman, Georgia. He didn't get to be a receiver, a jack of all trades. But I see the way these two guys look, their mannerisms after big plays, and it is eerily similar how he can do the same things that Mr. Hardman did for Georgia.
I think it's a really interesting comparison. We'll talk more about how this wide receiver situation fits in with Wren. It sounds like that Wren could be making a decision sooner rather than later now.
Thursday or Friday. That's the thinking right there. And
that's aggressive.
And we talked, and this is what we said earlier, Brandon, about accelerated timelines.
Yeah.
I spoke to him 2 weeks ago, and Corey Wren told me he wanted to make his decision in early August.
Amazing.
Before his season. Now, he's ready to go.
It's kind of funny. All these accelerated timelines all seem to have Georgia as a finalist. It almost seems like a lot of this is coming from Georgia as it tries to figure out its situation with what looks to be a limited collection of scholarships. Another guy who's put the pedal to the metal with his own recruitment is 5-star running back Kindle Milton, who was at Georgia's campus this past weekend. Jeff had a chance to talk to Chris Milton as a preview of that visit. You talked to Kendall after the visit was over with, and you had a lot of interesting things that came out of Milton on that visit, both in terms of his relationship with Georgia and kind of how Milton sees himself as a player right now. If you don't mind, for our audience, I want to play some of this audio and give you a chance to react to it. Maybe the most interesting thing that I heard, this is not a surprise, but it is interesting to hear Milton say this so explicitly, is one of the things that attracts him to Georgia is his belief that this is DeAndre Swift's last year in a Bulldogs uniform. Here's what Milton had to say about that.
They answered all questions. They wanted to get me all the information I needed to know that would make me successful at Georgia, and they did that very good. I like the situation, to be able to come in and play early, with DeAndre Swift leaving. So that was probably the biggest thing for me.
So listen, obviously DeAndre Swift has the option of returning for senior season, but for running backs, oftentimes they choose to do that less than other positions. Swift also one of the top players in the country. He could very well play himself into potentially being a first-round pick. That's not a surprise to Georgia fans. We talk openly and out loud about that all the time. But to hear Milton say, because I believe that's going to happen, that makes me like Georgia more, it really does articulate just how much of a business trip this was for Milton and his family to Georgia this past weekend.
Well, Chris Milton, who is a no-nonsense dude, don't dawdle in the hole, straight-ahead, hard charger type guy, he says they're looking for a spot where they can come in and be a number 1 or a number 2. And if DeAndre matriculates to the NFL, see Brian Herrien. What's going to happen with Kenny McIntosh? Unknown. What's going to happen with James Cook? More of a scat back, more of an all-purpose back. Zamir White is the great unknown question mark who could turn into an exclamation point for the Georgia offense. Kendall Milton sees Georgia, sees that fit, sees that depth chart, and thinks, I could be 1A or 1B at Georgia. And the family really likes the sound of that.
And something else that Milton sees and likes the sound of is looking at Todd Gurley, star for the LA Rams, Sony Michel, star for the New England Patriots, Super Bowl champions, Nick Chubb, a big part of the offensive story for the Cleveland Browns. Being the next guy as a part of that legacy, that's something else that Milton has noticed. Here's more from him.
I saw your tweet where you referenced Sony and Todd and Nick Chubb.
Oh yeah, it's huge to me, especially Coach McGee, coaching a majority of those backs. So it just shows that he knows what he's doing. He knows how to get people to the league, and that's my end goal that I want. So, that attracts me.
So listen, I don't want to make too much out of this, but it's interesting to me, once again, to hear Milton say, I want to go to the school that Herschel Walker went to. Now, I realize that's a long time ago, so a lot of these recruits, that name doesn't mean as much as it means probably to you and me. But what he says is, no, it's not just that cool guys like Sony Michel and Nick Chubb went here. It's the fact that they were coached by the running backs coach who's still in place now and blocked for by the offensive line, at least the philosophy of that offensive line that's still been put in place by Sam Pittman. And in the case of Andrew Thomas, and Ben Cleveland, some of the offensive linemen are actually doing some of that work, Solomon Kinley as well. Once again, this really speaks to he's not just dazzled by NFL names or kind of impressed by the fact that Todd Gurley's out in L.A. living the Hollywood lifestyle. No, he says the guys that have had success now in the NFL, they were a part of this system. This is more than just stargazing and celebrity power. This would seem to be part of Milton's due diligence, or is it not?
True, and I want everybody to kind of get a reckoning of all those highlights right there. A lot of people hear the name, but they don't really see the game like we can see it right here through our Hedges program. Now look at what this young man does, and you'll see burst, you'll see reading holes, you'll see following his blockers, but also you see a 6'1", 220-pound young man, gotta call him young man still, just exploding down the field. And again, this is another thing with physics in the Georgia offense, that Georgia offensive line. Sure, those really shifty sports cars are nice, but Georgia wants a guy in the Nick Chubb mold that will wear defenses down as a hammer. And when you see Kendall Milton do that, see that number 2, he do that. He's coached by a guy that's had some pro experience. Matt Giordano's been around the world in big-time football. You see him at Buchanan High School in Clovis, California, doing a lot of those things.
I mentioned Dell McGee. What Milton feels about McGee, he went into more detail about that. Take a listen.
I feel like he's one of those people that, could bring that dog, that bite they need to be successful in the game. And, like I said before, he's put a lot of people into the NFL, so it shows that he knows what he's doing. He knows how to get people to the next level, and that's pretty big for me about him.
So serious due diligence, time with Dell McGee, plan for how you'd be used. But there was also some time, I guess, for soaking in the atmosphere as well. And one of the words that Kendall Milton used to describe that visit was kind of a special experience and something it sounds like the family is not going to forget anytime soon. Here's more from Milton.
Georgia, that was a visit that, every time you get there, you kind of learn more about the school and the program. It's been nothing but good for me. They gave me a plan of how, they would use me and the timing of everything that we put into place. So, Georgia, that was definitely a special visit.
And, Jeff, let me let you hear one more from Milton here as well, because I thought this was kind of interesting, especially going back to the fact that Milton was here on G-Day. His father, Chris Milton, had challenged Georgia fans to create a big atmosphere around Athens when Milton was on campus. And well, let's face it, there's a huge difference in how college football is treated in Athens, Georgia, compared to the California area. Not to say that California doesn't have programs, but the overall experience around the sport is just incredibly different. And for Milton, that was one of the things that he noticed. Take a listen.
It was pretty big to me, seeing walking through, people knowing you, all that love. It just shows, how much the community is behind the football program. That's big to me because I want to go into a school where you can, have fun on the football field, those packed stadiums. So, seeing that community support, that was pretty big.
So listen, Jeff, I hear those clips. I've read your pieces at dognation.com surrounding the visit. It is really hard for me to come away thinking anything other than Georgia absolutely took its best shot with Kendall Milton here this week. It seems like a smashing success. Now, listen, in recruiting, it's never over till it's over. Milton's going to go to Tuscaloosa this weekend, and they'll roll out the red carpet or the crimson carpet for him there almost for sure. But if you're a Georgia fan, it's hard not to come away with this feeling like, yeah, Georgia really put itself in a good position for Milton.
Yeah, what was it his father said? He sent out a tweet that said Georgia was batting third and then Alabama was batting cleanup. You read what we've wrote about him on DogNation.com and the personal touches of the visit, not just crawfish, not just hanging out, having fun, not just seeing the linemen, but all this other stuff. And maybe if Georgia was batting third in this official visit rotation, was that Freddie Freeman hitting third? Maybe
absolutely. Chipper Jones or Freddie Freeman, something like that.
Maybe vintage era, steroid era Barry Bonds, maybe because Georgia unloaded with a lot of good stuff this weekend for Kindle Milton and company.
Now, vintage Barry Bonds, he would probably play for Clemson, but
you're going there, sir. You're going there, sir.
Never afraid to. It's Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Speaking of Kroger, they bring up something really good for you right now. I want to make sure you're aware of this. You can, starting today, Kroger launches a Kroger Fuel VIP program that allows you to earn 2 fuel points on purchase instead of just 1. Enrollment's easy. You can either scan your barcode at checkout or enroll online at Kroger.com/fuelvip. Now, the annual enrollment fee is just $40, and it's worth it big time because you get 2 fuel points for every dollar spent. What a great way to save money with so many people on the road so much this summer. Check that out at your local Kroger. All right, speaking of Milton, no doubt he ranks high on our list of top 2020 targets. We check in on those every week here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Let's do that now, and let's see who's named number 1 on the top of our list as we get heavily into this. It's the guy who's now been here for a while. At one point in time, Milton occupied this spot. He's been overtaken as of late by the 5-star cornerback, Keely Ringo. And a lot like Milton, Ringo's one of these guys that you feel pretty good about his connection to Georgia. In fact, Ringo even, I guess, gave Georgia fans a little more reason to feel that way this week. There was a comic strip that was out there. Connor Raleigh wrote about this at DogNation.com, kind of mocking Georgia for not having won a national championship in the last 39 years. Ringo tweets out to Kindle Milton saying, "I'm weak. That's supposed to be us." They were laughing about this, essentially mocking the Post, mocking Georgia. And I think that shows me, Jeff, that for Ringo and Milton, that national title drought for these guys does not seem to be that big of a deal. Is that your same takeaway on that?
Well, first of all, it's funny for these young men to notice that they're already being caricatured, so to speak, in comic book form. But I'm sure if I had a devilish Brandon Adams on my shoulder advising my words, he would probably say something like, well, there goes Alabama and attention to detail. They don't even have Kendall Milton's tattoo on his arm and everything else like that.
Not good.
Really funny. You gotta, what's the, imitation? That's some of the greatest form of flattery. You look at everything there, and first of all, what's wrong with the 1980 championship trophy? By the way, that's rusty and everything else like that. But then they go the shoulder pads or whatever. But it's interesting that this fan base thought enough of Georgia and 2 of its maybe top shelf targets to depict.
Was this Alabama fans doing this?
I think this was an Alabama-based author on the Twitter account that generated it.
Well, it's a good thing they can draw then, I guess, because, well, let me just stop that joke right there. Let me move on to name number 2 in our top targets of the class of 2020. Keely Ringo at the top, Kindle Milton just below him at number 2. They were on campus together back in April. Milton, as we just said, was on campus this past weekend. And shortly after this Alabama visit, it's about that time to start thinking about Milton making an announcement, is it not?
Yeah, no, let's just, a really quick speed bite here on Milton since he's number 2 in our top targets. The journey to Tuscaloosa, remember it's a midweek official.
Right.
They're on their way to Tuscaloosa to begin that final official visit today.
Good update on that, appreciate that. Name number 3, top targets for the class of 2020. Here in Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. We've shown you Keely Ringo. We've shown you Kendall Milton. How about 5-star athlete Rick Gilbert, who we think of as a tight end around here, who was at Alabama this past weekend and who you worried a lot of Georgia fans on Dog Nation Daily on Tuesday. And you pointed out the fact that right now Gilbert's relationship with a program like Tennessee is strong. As I told you, hard not to notice that he's visiting a lot of other places other than Georgia, and Georgia's hosting a lot of tight ends right now other than Gilbert.
Yeah, I think Georgia wants to come away with this cycle with 2 tight ends. I know my man here would have had a Fred G. Sanford heart palpitation moment if I had a Rick Gilbert anywhere but number 3 in that slot right now.
Believe me, me, I was watching to see.
If that would have fallen down to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or off the board, Brandon might have done some wall squats right here in the middle of Dog Nation World Headquarters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Gilbert is just a must-get for symbolic and tangible reasons. given the fact that he's such a highly rated in-state recruit, and the fact that, let's face it, one of Kirby Smart's few swings and misses have been on the top players inside the state of Georgia. This would be a bad loss for Georgia if Gilbert goes anywhere other than Athens. I don't care who Georgia signs as a replacement.
I think symbolic might be a good word for it there, sir, because if you look at what Theo Johnson can do, Darnell Washington can do, even guys like Malik Carr, who was in town, Jalen Conyers, who was in town, and I think you've got Cam Large also in town this week on his official visit as well. Georgia is really front and center on all those elite tight end targets.
Those are consolation prizes in comparison to Rick Gilbert, though.
I would back up off that. I would say Theo and I would say Darnell belong in the same vernacular, at least as an athlete-wise. There's no denying the polish that a Rick Gilbert has as a receiver and everything else, and just the ability he'll have to make plays. But Darnell and Theo can give you some of those same things.
Yeah, Darnell Washington I had no problem with. It's when you start running down the list where all of a sudden it starts to feel a little bit like something different. James Crum said he's worried about Rick Gilbert right now, and I think a lot of folks who heard Jeff on Tuesday may feel the same way. How about name number 4 on our list, top targets of the class of 2020? The number 1 overall prospect in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, Jordan Burch from out of Columbia, South Carolina. Anything new on Burch to report?
Carolina and Georgia seem like the final 2 titans in this race. You read a lot, you hear a lot, you see a lot, but not a lot directly is coming out of Jordan Burch and his camp. You do hear a lot. I don't know if you find this interesting, but his mother drifts over to the Columbia campus a lot, and checks out South Carolina a lot on her own, which may be troubling to some people.
Yeah, he is a high school teammate of Will Muschamp's son there at South Carolina. How about the next name on our list? Top targets rolling on here. Zachary Evans, the running back from out of Houston, Texas, who just took a visit to LSU and no doubt is probably looking in one way or another on the strong relationship that seemed to be formed between Kindle Milton and Georgia. What do you think Evans thinks about that right now?
Well, at some point, these boys do talk about wanting to play together. They save the tread on each other's tires for their NFL future. One of the things we don't have, we like to capture a lot of tweets of these guys. I don't know if you noticed, my friend, but there was some back and forth between Jalen Kimber and Zachary Evans on Twitter maybe a few hours ago. And as luck would have it, they've been paired up together at the the Jerry Jones opening, the opening finals out in Texas. Jalen Kimber and Zachary Evans are on the same team out in Texas for the opening finals. And some people were having fun with that, saying this might not be the last time that Zachary Evans and Jalen Kimber are on the same team. And both of those boys were engaging in the theater around that social media post.
So Crow King 123 on YouTube says we need Gilbert, we need Milton. I'd add to that Evans as well. Do you think flat out Georgia can get Milton and Evans? Would the presence of one be a turnoff for the other?
I don't think so. I think when you look at Evans' top 5, it doesn't really feel like a top 5 at all. You've got a school like Oklahoma that is already loaded up with 2 big-time backs, 2 top 5, top 7 backs in the country in the 2020 cycle. And then you have a school like Ohio State. And Ohio State's maybe long-term plan for its 2020 running back core involved either Kendall Milton or another guy, and that guy's name was not Zachary Evans. So you really look, there's Alabama, there's LSU, and there's Georgia there for Zachary Evans. So that's a chance. We've discussed ad nauseum the package deal now with Damian George. But let's think about Zachary Evans. He's already planned his official visit to Georgia. He just hasn't let that out when he's going to take his official visit to Georgia. We know it's not this weekend, and we know it's not going to be anytime for the next month or so as well. Maybe he makes it for that late July extravaganza in between the 2 dead periods and everything else.
That could get really fun.
Involving Zachary Evans. So it would be 5-star running back the month of May with Kendall Milton, the month of June with Kendall Milton, and then 5-star running back Zachary Evans in July.
So let me just put you on the spot on this one more time. If in early July Kendall Milton announces Georgia commitment, Zachary Evans still takes an official visit to Georgia after that.
Oh, I'm sure he'll take an official visit to Georgia regardless of what happens. Now, you do hear things about Georgia getting in with other backs. Tank Bigsby, I think Don Chaney Jr. is an interesting name. That's a Miami commitment right now out of South Florida. Chaney, I think, is the nation's number 5 back. He's more of a 5'11", 185-pound back. We know how that maybe doesn't seem like the great fit there with Georgia, but he does have 4.40 speed. Let me deflect one back to you like we're playing tennis here, sir. I give you 3 names and Georgia can take 2. Milton, Evans, Gilbert. Which 2 are you pulling out of that hat?
Milton and Evans. With all apologies to Rick Gilbert, I want the 2 running backs. I think running back's a major need. I talked about this in Dog Nation Daily in our comment section this morning. I think this is beyond luxury for Georgia. I think 2 elite backs, the class of 2020, is actually a pretty significant need.
I think if you don't have, maybe this is the strongest thing I'll say about this. I think if you don't have 2 elite 5-star breakaway home run threat backs, and remember, Georgia wants the back. Yeah, Great Wall of Georgia, do your thing. Give them a Google's worth of yards. But what Dell McGee wants, what separates him in terms of looking at elite running backs, is he wants the guy when he's hemmed up and he shouldn't get any more yards, the guy that finds 4, 5, 6, 17 more yards. Evans and Milton are 2 dudes that do exactly that.
Ro Hawkins agrees with me on Facebook. I will point out that Connor Riley over here behind the glass gave me a thumbs down when I took the 2 backs ahead of a Rick Gilbert. So we'll let you keep weighing in on that.
And one more thing, I don't think Georgia can utilize the full brilliance of the offensive line that Sam Pittman is creating unless they don't have 2 elite future first-round, second-round backs in the backfield.
That is something I agree with. All right, next name, top targets, the class of 2020. We'll try to pick up the pace here. It's Darnell Washington out of Las Vegas. And listen, I know that Washington, I guess the big news with him is, in terms of the re-rank, now moves ahead of Gilbert on the list of athletes, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. Anything else about Washington we need to know for now?
I would say, yeah, you just mentioned he moved ahead of Gilbert and keeping up this pace, but Washington is a guy to look for him to also be a potential visitor in late July, and another July to remember, potentially, for Dog Nation in Georgia.
It's also one of those guys that Mecole Hardman by name has mentioned, one that he's recruiting on right now. How about next name, top targets, class of 2020? It's Andrew Raym. We'll hear more from Raym in a moment in terms of his official visit to Georgia, but as a way of kind of publicizing this a little bit more, here's a tweet from Raym that kind of showcases himself and kind of what he looks like in a Georgia uniform. I got to tell you, it doesn't look too bad to me, this young man in a Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Seems like he fits like a glove in that Georgia uniform and fits right in with some of the guys that he could potentially be playing alongside.
Yeah, we're going to hear a little bit from Andrew in a minute, but I want to get everybody incredibly crisp with their phonetics. Andrew Raym, as in fame, as in game. Andrew Raym out of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. You'll love this one. Got the red jersey on there, sir. You know why?
I do like that because he's classic. He's old school. I like that.
It's just true lineman answer.
He's a gentleman.
It's a true lineman answer. It was just the closest jersey that they had out there for him to put on.
No, this young man's a patriot. You can tell that by looking at him.
And he's a fun kid to talk to. He is a very much. It seems like every time I talk to Andrew Raym, that maybe his mother Andrea Raym has slipped in some true serum or sodium pentothal before every answer, because this young man just says it like it is, tells it like it is, and says what he feels.
All right, let me do a couple more here. Next name after Andrew Raym. I'm assuming we're going to see another offensive lineman pop in here. Indeed we do. Cedric Vaughn, the center out of New Orleans. I thought it was interesting to see this week Georgia commit Akiola Ogunbi, who's actually turned out to be among Georgia's most vocal proponents from its 2020 class in terms of recruiting for others. He has sent out his push here when it comes to what's going on with Cedric Vaughn. They're saying, we're waiting on you right now. By the way, getting a little love to the Connor Riley piece at dognation.com in the process there. I love to see Akiola recruiting Cedric Vaughn. He has been a big Georgia recruiter and a big fan of the Dogs. I like to see that from Mr. Ogunbi.
Been in his ear for a while. Those two guys have been perhaps Sam Pittman's 2 top targets for the interior of the Georgia offensive line. I'm of the belief, I'm going to put myself in the church. Maybe I might be in the minority here, but I think things happen where Georgia ends up taking a 5th and a 6th offensive lineman for this class. It might mean they only take 1 inside linebacker. It might mean they take 1 less player at a maybe position of need. But I do think Georgia winds up with 6 O-linemen in this class because guys like Von Prawn and guys like Raym, they're just too hard to put down.
Philo Beto in our YouTube comment section says, I hope that Raym is all dog. Can't have too many kids like that on your team, an unselfish mauler. That's pretty well said. I think that Cedric Von Prawn at the center position probably factors into that discussion as well. We'll hear more from Raym coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, final 2 names on our top targets of the class of 2020. Let's go defensive line here with Jacoby Cowan out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Cowan was in the news as of late because he just took a visit to Ohio State. He says it's definitely been real until next time. He says visit picks coming soon, so it seems like Cowan had himself a good time in Columbus as they try to work their way in on this pretty good-looking defensive lineman out of the state of North Carolina, a place that Georgia's gotten defensive linemen before.
Yeah, I would say this with Jacoby Cowan, who's now all the way up to like 277 pounds and almost 6 feet 6 inches tall. Defensive line, Brandon. Clemson has that pedigree. Ohio State has that pedigree.
Yeah, Larry Johnson, their position coach, has been a major factor in a lot of recruitments before. Brenton Cox mentioned it by name several times.
Putting guys in the league, that's what both of those schools can attest right there. And Jacoby Cowan just took his first official visit to Ohio State, but his first announced official visit was to Georgia. We all have to believe that Ohio State and Georgia are right up near the pole position in his recruitment, although he plays his cards very close to the vest. One thing I got to remember to come back on, the YouTube Philo Beto that brought this up, I think when Brandon Adams comes out with his solo album, the title of the album is going to be Unselfish Mauler.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I like that. That's a great phrase, Philo. I agree with Jeff on that. Let me see name number 10 on our list. Marcus RoseMe from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Just took a visit to those lousy, stinking Gators this past weekend. But you know what? Speaking from the perspective of a fan for a moment, there's no way Florida can get a receiver that Georgia wants. I don't care if it's inside the state of Florida or what. If this is a head-to-head battle between Georgia and Florida for RoseMe, I believe it's already over.
I think as much as folks like to maybe pollute what Georgia has done at the wide receiver spot, recent tweet kind of validates that Georgia is the only program in major college football that has had a guy drafted, dating back to Chris Conley of all people with the Chiefs, that have had a guy drafted, a receiver drafted in each of the last 5 NFL drafts. And quite frankly, on the topic of Marcus RoseMe, I think you're a little disappointed that he hasn't already committed to Georgia within the 24-hour rule of his Florida official visit.
Listen, let him drag this thing out for a while. Let him get the anxiety of the Florida fans up along the way. Let me quickly check in on those guys that just missed on this list. There's a name I'm looking to see, and I don't believe I see it, which I think is interesting. So we got Tank Bigsby, we got Justin Flo, the linebacker, among the top players in the country, although in this program we haven't talked about him as much. A.J. Henning did make the list. See, I was kind of assuming that the Corey Wren talk might be related to the fact that maybe A.J. Henning is trending to a place like, I don't know, Michigan or some school like that. I'm actually a little bit surprised that you still have A.J. Henning on this list. Not because I know anything, just because I suspected that you might be thinking about Henning somewhere else.
Well, what I try to do when I put that list together, Brandon, is I simply try to make it as full as possible, so I will thoroughly frustrate you when we come up with the third slide of also names to know, and
We've achieved that.
They're like, it's like a Costco or a Kroger aisle worth of selection of everything to look for right there. You've got a lot of names there. You got offensive linemen, you got defensive linemen. There's some names drifting off. There's some names drifting on. If I had to go to 11, Brandon, I might make number 11 Noah Sewell, the young man out of Utah.
I feel like at some point in time you got to cap the list. We're already at 20 names. Between the 10 that make the top 10, the 10 that almost made the list, at this point in time we might as well just read from the phone book.
Okay, hold on a second. Now this is Brandon being Brandon. And a little overkill. You do realize that Georgia has 13 commitments in the class. And they have room for at least 13 more.
Just saying it's hard to capsulize all of
So
this.
you're going to look at 13 out of those 20 and think, yeah, they're going to get some of these guys. They're going to get some of these guys.
All right, so let me look at this list for a second. And I'm going to ask you to pick out a couple of names. Now, Wren we've already talked about. I think it's interesting that you keep Lloyd on here despite the fact I think he's the only committed elsewhere player that's ever been included on this list. You reported in the forum this week that Tank Bigsby visited Georgia already. Pick out one or two of these names and educate us on them for a second.
Well, Lloyd is interesting first. I think the reason he remains in there is he gave some interviews coming out of his South Carolina official visit where he said he's probably going to give Georgia a visit afterward. Okay. He's probably going to visit other schools. I think he mentioned Penn State and Georgia. So that gives some life on the respirator there a little bit in terms of Brandon Adams' mind about where things are with Georgia. I mentioned Noah Sewell a lot. That's the 6'1" and some change, 266-pounder. Everybody's going to go, Jeff and BA, what are you talking about a 266-pound inside linebacker? That's the same weight that Devin White was at when he was making his way to LSU as a prospect as well. You've got a lot of theater here with defensive backs.
Well, can I be blunt for a second? Is the reason why you have Justin Flo so low is because you don't think Flo is that into Georgia? Why do you have Flo so low?
Flo, take the 5-star off of his name and you don't think he's low at all. I think
But that's a fairly significant part of his bio.
But I would say...
He's top 5 player in the country, isn't he?
Top 5 player in the country. I think Georgia's trying to figure out through a combination of factors whether their guy is Noah Sewell or whether their guy is Justin Flo. And I think right now, Sewell might be trending really hot right there. Right. The other thing to think about there is I'm not just going to give you the highest rated guys or the guys that are, that would look the greatest on that composite score and everything else on that 24/7 sports rating. A lot of those names, Yeah, let's go back to that list one more time. Let me loop a couple of guys in here. Darian Green-Warren, Avante Williams, Chris Thompson Jr., Nudie McLaughlin, Dwight McLaughlin. Those are 4 defensive backs right there. I think Georgia's going to.
Is Chris Thompson new? Was he on this list last week?
He's kind of been around this area. Sometimes I keep guys off, Brandon, if you can believe that. I'm just not naming everyone under the kitchen sink about this. You can look at those 4 names and you got to go. Georgia's going to pull one of those 4 in terms of completing out its defensive backs crop. There's also maybe the junior college prospects there to think about there in terms of the defensive backfield.
You know, this is a crowded list when you see how small the names get on like the second column. Like they start to get smaller. It's like when you're taking notes in high school and you run out of room on the page.
All right, smart guy. Next week we're going to have a Star Wars credit scene type intro scroll.
I like the idea of that.
With all the names, because that way, Brandon, we're gonna do anything we can to get Brandon's goat here on this program.
All right, at least one of those names you saw there was a tight end in Theo Johnson. Coming in a moment, I'm going to do more tight end recruiting talk here because I do think that's interesting with Georgia, especially given where things may or may not stand with a Rick Gilbert. Before that, though, let me remind you, 3 times the fuel points on hundreds of items are available for you right now at Kroger, including Kroger ice cream, Beggin' treats for your dogs, Hershey's chocolate syrup, Red Bull, and so much more. You just got to look for those 3 times the fuel points savings tags right there on the aisle. Check that out. It's the perfect time to fuel up and get ready for all your summer travels. Now, before we talk tight ends, let me also talk about one of the names that we just mentioned a moment ago. That's Andrew Rame, who recently took his official visit to Georgia. And this was a big one for Rame there as well. And, like a lot of these offensive linemen as of late, I know a lot of folks read this from you at DogNation.com, Rame comes away from this experience. Yeah, you see him there one more time. Rame comes away from this experience having some really positive feelings about UGA. In fact, here is details from him in his own words about what that experience was like.
I mean, honestly, I have a great feeling when I'm at UGA, and I mean, it's just an extraordinary place with amazing facilities, and Coach Pittman, I think, is awesome, and I love it.
It's really interesting to hear, and we've done this 9 million times now, but it never really changes, how specifically a lot of these players, and Tate Rattlers was no different, Joshua Braun was no different, how specifically they articulate just how influential Pittman is with them. To go into Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, I don't care if Pittman's from Oklahoma or not. If they were to pull Rame out of there with Michigan chasing hard, Oklahoma won the Joe Moore Award, this would be among the more significant feats for him, regardless of the fact that you and Connor Riley have kind of highlighted the historic level of offensive line recruiting success that might be in place here. This one in particular, because of where you have to go to get him, that's a real tough recruitment, Jeff.
For me, it feels a lot like Tate Rattlers. Tate Rattlers was a guy that grew up wearing Tennessee gear. We've shown the world about the front glass plate and the vanity plate and the back window plate. Well, Andrew Rame was a guy who grew up wearing those Oklahoma Sooners helmet, Oklahoma Sooners gear, the jerseys. That was the dream. And yet this is a clash between the dream and then what is simply best for his football future. And I'm going to entertain a couple thoughts. I'm just going to acknowledge and discuss a couple of thoughts, highlight a couple thoughts in the YouTube comment section right now. Everybody wonders, 6 offensive linemen, what's up there? Can Georgia going to take 6 guys in a class where there maybe only take 23 or 24 guys? Let me ask you folks this. If Isaiah Wilson and Andrew Thomas and Solomon Kinley and Ben Cleveland vector away from the Georgia program and go on to the NFL's greener pastures, you think Georgia might need, and also DeMarcus Hayes is a guy that's in the program and is also another scholarship offensive lineman. I'm really only saying Georgia's going to replace all those scholarships with a new guy, plus one. And when you have guys like Tate Rattlers, you have guys like Akinola Ngunbi, you have guys like Broderick Jones, you simply have to take advantage of those guys, including a Joshua Braun, including a Cedric Vaughn. And really, Andrew Rame is just going to be another potentially marvelous pull for Sam Pittman in Georgia.
If it goes down, and how is it that it could go down? Well, it sounds like, according to Rame, that Pittman got really real with him about if you stay in Big 12 country, your chance of getting the NFL may not be as great as if you come down here to the South. Here is what Rame had to say about that.
I guess a low moment was when Coach Pittman showed me pictures of O-line, D-line drafted out of each conference, and it's like 25 SEC, like 10 Big 12, and 15 Big 10, and that surprised me.
Yeah, listen, there's no doubt this has become a line of scrimmage league. Defensive line been that way for a while. Georgia now setting the pace when it comes to offensive linemen. Alabama to a certain extent there as well. And I'm sorry, I do think your competition's better here. I do think your chances of making a name for yourself, here are going to be better. Oklahoma had a great offensive line a year ago, but as it stands right now, the true lines of scrimmage clashes are happening here in the SEC in a way they're not happening in the Big 12, and they may not be happening week to week in the Big 10. There's plenty of good, but maybe not as consistently good as what you might deal with in the SEC. I can understand why that's a selling point for Wren.
Let me do some quick math here, Brandon. I know you really love quick math. If you and I are here doing this program in July of 2021, the number for Pat Pittman and drafted proteges in the NFL, I think it's currently around 15 right now. It might be up to 22, 23, 24 by that time. Mm-hmm. And then, if you folks think Sam Pittman recruits well now, wait till you see what he's done with a couple of first rounders in the 2020 draft, 2021 draft, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. One more thing from Andrew Wren here. One of the things that you like about him is his potential versatility. I think you made the comparison to Isaiah Wynn, a guy who I think at one point in time played like 4 positions for Georgia, attempted to play center, although that experiment probably didn't stick for him, but he certainly proved himself capable of a lot of different positions. It sounds like Andrew Wren would be kind of comfortable being in that kind of same spot, and in fact, he thinks that that's something that he's coming, if he were to come to Georgia, that's something that he'd be coming to do. Here's more from Wren.
He knows and I know that I can play all 5 positions, so it's just whatever, I guess, just however it works out.
Do you have an affinity for one position over the other?
I just want to get on the team, start helping. It doesn't really matter to me. I haven't played center or guard in a few years. It's been on tackle. But, I'm comfortable from pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, you like that willingness to play anywhere, wants to get on the team. Georgia fans hope it's Georgia, but a team, and get out there and do his thing. And it seems like he feels like he could play just about any spot there for the Dogs, which is a good thing to think about.
And, we might be rolling into this same type of headline next week on Hedges as well, because Andrew Wren told me without any sliver of doubt that he could be committed within a week to 14 days, 1 week to 2 weeks. He's going to take his official visit to Michigan this weekend. He at one time wanted to take 5. No, he's going to settle likely with 2. He tells me he probably just needs 2. The finalists are Oklahoma, Michigan, and Georgia. And it sounds like he is really vectoring in on a decision fairly soon.
All right, let's talk about tight ends here for a moment. It's before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff mentioned before, hard to tell what's going on with the Rick Gilbert these days, who could be an amazing tight end in the Georgia offense. Darnell Washington would also be a really good one as well. They were both listed in our top 10 a moment ago. But Georgia has been in the mix for a lot of other tight ends lately. Jalen Conyers is listed Georgia as a finalist. Cam Large was recently on the Georgia campus taking a visit. Here's a picture that verifies that statement. Pretty cool edit there with the Cam Large name by the Georgia staff there. He says excited to be back in Athens. He's among the top tight ends in the country, kind of showing a little love there towards UGA. Malik Carr, much the same way, he was on campus this past weekend. Here's also a picture of him getting a chance to be a part of that visit and having a good time doing a lot of those kinds of things on his official visit there. Where does all this stand as of late? To Todd Hartley's credit, I think he's listed as a finalist for, if you're going to count Washington and Gilbert as tight ends for right now, like all the top tight ends in the country, all the big names you go after. I know Notre Dame's got a couple commits there at that position there as well. Hartley's done well as far as being a finalist for all these guys, but is the presence of these guys like Carr, like Large, the announcement from Conyers that Georgia's one of his finalists, when we really hadn't talked about Conyers too much before that, is this an example that Georgia is not in good shape with a Rick Gilbert, or maybe not in great shape with Darnell Washington?
I think this is just Georgia having all of its ducks in a row and having all the contingency plans yet necessary. I think, and Brandon, don't overanalyze this or whatever. You remember Jalen Conyers has actually also jumped ahead of that incredible athlete Theo Johnson in terms of the tight end rankings for the country now. Jalen Conyers is 3. Theo Johnson is 4. I think Cam Large is actually just a 3-star tight end. Right. I want to say this, Brandon, and it's not letting anyone down or it's not this X, Y, or Z. If Georgia ends up with any combination of a Conyers, a Washington, a Gilbert, and a Johnson, any combination of those 4, I think Todd Hartley will have done a heck of a job. And let's face it, folks, Georgia has recruited mega tight ends. Isaac Nauta, Orson Charles, lots of strong men have came in to play tight end spot at the University of Georgia. Cam Large is wearing a number 1 in that edit right there, and I'm going to say this. He's not going to wear that number 1 at Georgia, even if he chooses Georgia. That's George Pickens' number for a while. And I know everybody focuses on the championships and that chapel bell ringing after the very last game of the college football season. I don't think not getting X guy and Y guy at tight end would be the difference in Georgia winning national titles one day, or as natties as all the kids like to say, as much as it will be other positions like the offensive line, like cornerback, like defensive line, and running back in the 2020 pecking order.
So a couple things here. Believe it or not, the scenario you laid out, if you can give Georgia one of what I think of as kind of the experimental athletic tight ends like a Darnell or a Gilbert, and then one of the kind of the true tight ends to go along with that, I'd actually almost be okay with that. I'm sure that probably surprises you. But here's how I'm going to chastise you, Mr. Sintel. You, as much as anybody, have kind of gotten the hype train out of the station when it comes to Rick Gilbert. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube on that now.
No, he's great. I mean, that's the reason why I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I keep him at number 3 in the country because if we want to be really clear about Eric Gilbert, if I was working that board in Athens, I might not worry so much about numbers and Marcus RoseMe as your other wide receiver. I think Georgia might even eventually just trump Tennessee in this recruitment by saying, we're going to recruit you a lot like a wide receiver. You're going to do it in this offense, and you're going to get fed the ball a lot. And, folks, Eric Gilbert is just going to be a matchup nightmare anywhere he goes. He puts so much work into running his routes like a receiver, doing things that hard-charging 6'2" guy, that technician at the wide receiver spot would want to do. Oh, yeah, and by the way, he's 6'6" and 255 pounds. He's just a unique guy. I do agree with you that symbolically, Georgia still hasn't pulled in the number 1 overall prospect in the state of Georgia since Kirby Smart has been in Athens. I think that's very telling, but Gilbert is a guy that Alabama's gotten the official visit. Tennessee is awfully very much in his ear. Here's what I think happens, and I'm going to say think happens based on what I know right now. I think this decision goes into the season, and it will be the best thing for all parties because then Gilbert can see how many catches Charlie Warner's going to have per week, and then he can see what Jim Chaney is doing at that offense.
Because that's a delayed timeline compared to where it was before, right?
He'd like to make the decision before his senior year because that just feels right, but he's not going to rush this thing just in order to sit there and say he did it by a certain time.
Now, our buddy Michael Carvel saw him this past weekend at the Corky Kell 7-on-7 tournament. I heard that Gilbert really showed out at that event. Michael, would you back us up on that? I heard that he showed out.
I mean, to me, I've seen this young man so many times. When you're talking about Eric Gilbert in a situation where there's no pads and he can use that basketball player's body to go up and get the ball, to me, Eric Gilbert blowing up a 7-on-7 competition and laying down the headlines and the highlights is kind of like you inserting a Florida joke into one of your programs.
That's exactly right. That's what the people have come to expect. All right, let me do a little online chatter here for a moment. We've talked a lot about offensive linemen here this week on the show before the Hedges presented by Kroger. I love Mike Braun's picture of Joshua Braun, his son. I like the fact that Josh is kind of not on social media. I think that's kind of classic and cool, hanging out with Tate Rattlers. I like the classic rock. Mike Braun gives you the Pink Floyd reference here with another brick in the wall. And I got to tell you, that's a pretty good looking sight there for Georgia fans to see Braun and Rattlers there together.
You know, can you imagine growing up with this young man? And I tweeted something out about just give him some green paint, some purple pants, and he would look like the Hulk. That's what I thought when I saw him in the stands at G-Day and how big he was. And let's just say this right now, Brandon. Look at the hands. He looks bigger than Tate Rattlers. He makes Tate Rattlers look less large.
Well, you know, I always joke about this. When you interviewed Rattlers in Rome the day he committed and he said he was going after Joshua Braun, you said, oh, yeah, the big guy. I always think it's funny that you're talking to Tate Rattlers, calling somebody else the big guy. But in that picture now, Braun is standing in front of him a little bit, which can be misleading. But Braun does look like the bigger of the two right there. He's a giant. He is a giant.
I almost don't even know what that program is. Can you imagine growing up with him as your son and he's walking in front of the television set and you're like, hey, son, get out of the way. I can't see what's going on. Well,
I don't believe I'd tell Josh Braun to get out in front of the TV.
He takes
I'm
up.
sure Mike Braun's got no problem doing that.
He takes up half that screen. And let's go back to that one more time, Brandon. So you got these dudes in a dark alley. And obviously you want these dudes on your side in a dark alley. But if you had to sit there and think, which one of those guys do I want to mess with the least?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, honestly, like Joshua Braun being as big as he is, he also come across as a gentleman. Like, the guy that you don't want to meet in a dark alley is Cade Mays, because in addition to being big, he's going to reach and grab something like a pipe or something like that. I feel like, and you kind of want that from your offensive line a little bit. So that's the guy I don't want to meet in a dark alley. The guy that's got that, I'm going to find a trash can to hit you with or something like that. That's where I think Cade Mays got a little bit of him in a dark alley situation. So that's the guy I probably least want to face right there.
So I always come at it with Sam Pittman is recruiting Roadhouse remake bouncers to be his offensive lineman. But I do think Chris Milton says it best by just throwing that shot up of Braun and Rattlers one more time and simply just saying, hellified.
We've talked about Raja Sherman on this show before, the sister of five-star linebacker commit Mecole Sherman. She was very happy to see Jared Zirkle, the kicker from out of Texas who committed to Georgia this past week. She says, nothing makes my day more than a UGA commitment. So she's obviously happy about Zirkle. Some film that's been shown around on social media as of late also gives you an idea of why some people also feel that way. Let me show you this brief video of Zirkle doing kind of what he does best here, giving some big booms from like the 70-yard range. Jeff, I know you've spent some time with Zirkle, and I know you know this recruitment pretty well. How big of a deal is Georgia getting this kicker?
Huge leg, and everybody starts wondering about how many steps he puts out here. And we're going to have some, this is what I do. I give you some in-depth coverage on all these guys in a story to come on dognation.com. Would you happen to know, my gentleman and the scholar friend Brandon Adams, that Jared Zirkle was wearing Georgia gear back when he was your son Charlie's age?
Is that right?
That's how good that's how good that story is going to be.
That's really, I'm happy to see him get a chance to play at the school that he dreamed of playing for them. That's pretty cool. Now, when he gets on campus, he's going to have to be doing some hard work in the weight room like the current Georgia players are as well. I thought Scott Sinclair, who has some good videos that he tweets out this time of year, showing off some of these box jumps here. Now, box jumps for me are always one of the coolest things to see these elite athletes doing, because it's the most difficult thing to imagine someone like me probably being able to do. That is a magic trick. How does anybody from a seated position go to a standing box jump like that? Are you kidding me? That's amazing.
So start watching this, and you see that Tyreek McGee, this is our first guy. He has 3 handles worth of boxes.
Yeah.
Now, if we go to the next tweet, I don't know if we have the next tweet, but the next one up is one Nolan Smith, Brandon. And look at that.
Oh, my God.
He's got 4 handles worth of boxes up there. And again, this is 6'3", 236 going up there and getting that. Folks, Nolan Smith, if you hadn't heard yet, you better ask somebody. He might end up being the most explosive athlete Georgia has had on the defensive side of the ball ever, coming out of a standing position.
That is not as easy as he makes it look.
He makes it all look easy. And then lastly, we've got future NFL first or second round draft pick DeAndre Swift doing the same thing at the same height that Nolan Smith was putting down.
Well, let's see DeAndre get up and get going here. I kind of like the slow motion move here for this. This is kind of like this is anticipatory.
Chariots of fire here, and here comes his appetite of destruction. And he's taking a few practice swings at it. He's taking a good deep breath. He's thinking about that Alabama rematch. He's thinking about that Texas game.
Here we go.
All of a sudden, he thinks of his favorite Florida Gator joke.
Well, this is like watching Ralph Macchio and the Karate Kid. This one's here we go. Look at that. Good job. Good job. Pretty good.
Sinclair's like, why am I needing to spot these dudes? I know they could do one more box if necessary.
That's not a bad thing to see. Last thing to show you as part of our online chatter, a very simple tweet coming from James Cook, but somewhat poignant. Just given the fact that a lot of Georgia fans have questioned kind of how he fits into the picture. We didn't see a ton from him last week, but the dog emoji would lead you to believe that Cook is still focused in and ready to go and ready to potentially make a name for himself this summer during practice and maybe on the field as well. It's a deep running back situation for Georgia right now, but Cook's a big part of it.
Might I offer an alternate interpretation of that tweet there, sir?
Oh, by all means.
So everybody and their brother tweeted out some good juju coming out of the Kindle Milton official visit.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Oh, I see. So you think that's a cryptic tweet from Cook in reference to some of the stuff that you maybe saw from MJ Sherman, some things like that.
Might be an overall feeling that he is glad to be a part of the Bulldog running back crew.
I still think it's kind of cool to hear from Cook here in this regard, just given the fact that a lot of Georgia fans are kind of wondering, how does he fit into that competition where you think that Harrion and White and the aforementioned Swift may be the top 3 guys? I'm looking forward to seeing James Cook, who may not have been fully 100% during spring practice for the entirety of those practices. I'm looking forward to seeing more of James Cook.
Does anyone in the country, has Georgia ever in the history of this program, ever had a better fourth man up in a running back room? I don't want to say plan D, but number 4 potential guy, because he's going to do a little bit of scat back, a little bit of slot, a little bit of everything out there. James Cook.
Wait.
When he gets on the field, first of all, if he was the primary ball carrier for Georgia with 15 to 20 carries in a game, something went wrong. But the days, let's face it, folks, the days of Mr. Douglas back there in the backfield and having to carry 38 times in a big game, the days of all that at Georgia football history, those seem like a long way away.
Yeah, really fun stuff to think about. All right, it's Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Time now to turn the floor over to Jeff Sintel for our weekly six-pack, where we get some questions to stump you, or you stump us, I should say.
Let's go. Brandon wants
a chance to do that.
Brandon wants a quick show. He's got a tea time to get to. Let's go.
All right, question number one.
Question number 1.
No setup at all, no theme or anything like that?
We got All-Americans, Georgia history, some potpourri and everything else like that.
All right.
Which one of these Bulldogs was not named to an All-American team in his Georgia career?
Good question.
David Pollock, Jarvis Jones, Ben Jones, John Stinchcomb, or Todd Gurley?
So I know for a fact Stinchcomb was. By the way, John was with us this past weekend for the kickoff of Dog Nation Days of Summer. Pollock and Gurley almost certainly would have had to have been, although Gurley did get hurt in 2014. Jarvis Jones in 2012, you'd think he'd have to be. Ben Jones is a weird inclusion in there, but Jones seems like the likely answer. I'm going to have to go to that, although Matt Ruger says that the injury suspension situation for Todd Gurley took him out of the mix in 2014. A lot of folks actually saying Gurley. So maybe they are right about that. Maybe the absolute violation of Gurley's personal rights in 2014 kept him from being an All-American. So I'm going to change my answer. I'm going to go with the consensus on this and say Todd Gurley.
Okay, Brandon had a absolute violation of an incorrect answer right there. Give the man a bell. He got that one right after some help from Dog Nation on this.
Yeah, y'all helped me on that one. I polled the audience. You gave me the right answer.
His first read on that one was incorrect.
One of the great travesties of all time, the fact that Gurley got taken off the field in 2014. You can't do anything about injury, but the NCAA stuff was suspicious.
BA, what if you had a daily program talking to the Georgia faithful?
Where I get to do this kind of stuff there?
During that time.
Oh my gosh. I'd come in with like war paint just ready to go.
Number 2.
I'd come in like William Wallace and Braveheart.
Who was the last Georgia Bulldog running back to be named an All-American?
Good question. Really good question.
Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, those are the obvious. Knowshon Marino, Tim Worley, Garrison Hurst. Who was the last Georgia running back to be named an All-American?
So did Michel and Chubb split the vote? How about Chubb in 2014? That would have been an interesting one. Am I overthinking this? I'm tempted to want to say Knowshon Marino because Chubb and Michel may have split the vote. All-American's a little bit different than All-SEC after all. Zach Smith says C as well. I'm going to say Knowshon and probably regret the fact that I said that. 2007 for Knowshon Marino.
Let's look back at that. Let's look back at the contenders. Obviously, we're trying to give you a little bit of maybe the road not taken with a lot of these guys. The correct answer.
Wilson says Chubb. Probably should be. James Crump mentions our buddy Tim Worley. I'm going to go Knowshon on this, though, and probably regret my answer, but I'm sticking with Knowshon as my answer.
Connor, give our Young Adams fan a answer.
There you go. So it was 2008, not 2007, although Marino's probably a better player in 07 than he was in 08, probably, right?
Probably the name recognition came along. Normally
weird that Chubb and Michel were never All-Americans.
You have to, there's a lot of things. Playboy, Walter Camp, UPI, AP, all throughout the year. American Football Coaches Association, SportsIllustrated.com has an All-American team now.
Does that count?
They're recognized by the Georgia program, so that's what I'm going for with there. But moving right along, Brandon is off to a stellar start. Which one of these Bulldogs did not make an All-American team after multiple seasons in Athens? We're talking about multiple All-Americans in Georgia football history now. David Pollock, Jarvis Jones.
Hold on, I'm confused. They did not make an All-American team after multiple. So that means they were on campus for like 3 years before they made one?
No. Which one of these Bulldogs? To simplify the question, all of these guys in this list but one was a 2-time or 3-time All-American at Georgia.
Okay, so one of these has only got one.
One of these is only a 1-time All-American at the University of
All right.
Georgia. So you got Pollock, you got Jones, you got Matt Stinchcomb, the other brother Stinchcomb. You got John Little, if everybody remembers him from the 80s. And you've also...
I don't remember John Little.
Oh, great defensive back, safety. Georgia used to be loaded at safety.
What year would that have been?
80s era. He was part of the 43-4-1 teams.
Okay.
You got to remember Terry Hogue, John Little, Jeff Sanchez,
Yeah, now
Scott Werner.
Sanchez, I remember because that's the look at the sugar falling out of the sky game.
Yeah, with all those DBs, Georgia had something rolling in the early 80s.
Okay, I'm going to say Jarvis Jones only made All-American one time in 2012. Now, is there a chance more than one of these is the answer?
There's no chance here, sir.
Or I'm going to say Jarvis Jones is the answer. He only made one All-American team, and he did so in 2012.
Might be the most unlikely of unlikelies here. Connor, can you give the world the answer for Brandon Adams?
Champ Bailey.
But that was a good one, though. He had like 50 catches for 900 yards.
Yeah, he was Georgia's best offensive and defensive player. That's a hard thing to do.
He was basically kind of like Jerry Jeudy and DeAndre Baker for Georgia that
So
year.
Lorenta Everhart was also going Jarvis Jones. So Jones was an All-American in 2011, too?
Yeah, he had some fantastic seasons.
He's a fantastic player. I sort of think of him more as like an All-American level player in 2012, although I guess I'm wrong about that. Good stuff. Those are good questions.
Keep it going. We got another answer. I think we're rolling on to number 4. Which one of these current Bulldogs has already made an All-American team so far in his career? We got the likelies here. We got J.R. Reed, Andrew Thomas, Jake Fromm, DeAndre Swift, and Rodrigo Blankenship.
It's Andrew Thomas. It's B, Andrew Thomas. I don't believe any of the others have. Rodrigo would be my next answer. I believe it's Thomas B as the only one.
Folks, let's Memorex this moment, or let's put the DVR up in the cloud for the moment. I think, and Connor, you can back me up on this, I think that might have been the most positive and assured answer Brandon Adams has ever given in the history of the six-pack treaty.
I think I'm right. Crystal Chrissy, Will, and Hashim Spikes also agree with me, although Brian McPhail does say Hot Rod. I believe Andrew Thomas is the right answer here.
I'm not going to steal your thunder, sir. That is exactly right.
Oh, there you go.
Ding, ding, ding him up right there. Andrew Thomas actually made 3 All-American teams last year after his sophomore season.
Now, all of those guys from J.R. Reed, they've all been honored as all-SEC players, but the All-American is a little bit of a lagger there.
And I could have been trickeration with that because a lot of those guys have made a freshman All-American team, but this is the big dog, big boy, pure-blooded All-American team.
You would have heard from me had you included freshman All-American in this discussion.
Would have almost been worth it to see the anguish out of Brandon's ears.
You would have definitely heard from me on that.
Moving right along, number 5. Number 5 in our weekly six-pack. Brandon's already got 4 of them down. Cracking open number 5. Which returning Bulldog has the most career starts?
Oh, this is a good question. Good question.
See, we're already transitioning a little bit now into season theater with these questions. Jake Fromm, Andrew Thomas, J.R. Reed, and Rodrigo Hot Rod Blankenship.
So Rodrigo is the only one of these guys to play any in 2016. Therefore, he gets the nod. I don't think of a kicker as a starter, although I guess you should. He's the only one to have done so in 2016. He didn't start the entirety of the season in 2016, I don't believe, but he was settled in there by about halfway through. Fromm missed his first game as a starter because he was the backup at the time. Andrew Thomas didn't play at least once this year in 2018. Rodrigo's the answer because he played in 2016.
Now, Connor, I really could have had fun with this one because when you're a specialist, I'm using a little editorial oversight here. When you're a specialist, you're not credited as a starter.
That's why.
Which I think is a very wacky, wild term. And I could have really goosed you on this, and I could have said one of the other 3 guys. But that's a bogus stat world, stat man, stat maven world. Rodrigo Blankenship has been the primary kicker, kickoff guy for Georgia for years and years and years.
You're a decent man.
And he has started 42 straight games for Georgia so far. And, you know, here's what I'm going to get a little interesting here. I know we're always up against the clock. I want to see how big boy your trivia pants are here right now. If I take Hot Rod Blankenship off that list and I make it among those 3, Jake Fromm, Andrew Thomas, and J.R. Reed, which one of those 3 has started the most games for Georgia?
Has J.R. missed a start? Because Fromm and Thomas would have. I believe I'm going to say Reed because I can think of at least one game when Thomas and Fromm did not start. So I'm going to say J.R. right there.
Give him an extra ding there. like ringing his bell from 70s disco. Brandon gets a bonus question. J.R. Reed, and this is what's funny. J.R. Reed has started 29 games at Georgia. Fromm and Thomas have both started 28 games at Georgia.
Good. Really, that's good stuff, Jeff. Now that's the kind of thing we depend on you for.
Moving right along. Last one. What school record did Rodrigo Hot Rod Blankenship set last year? You're going to look like a smart guy at your June, July early pregame tailgate if you know this one. A, loudest pregame ovation for a kicker in Sanford Stadium history.
Like that one.
B, touchbacks in a single season. C, most consecutive extra points to start a career, 154. Or D, most field goals made over 45 yards in a career, 11.
So I feel confident in this one. I may get it wrong. I'll see what the audience says on this. I believe the answer to this is going to be B, because Georgia kicked off more last season than it certainly did in previous UGA seasons, just given the fact that it's scored a lot of points. So I'm going to say the presence of those touchbacks may have been a record, just because, listen, let's face it, there was a previous era when nobody scored in college football, and there was also a previous era when Georgia wasn't scoring quite as much as it is right now. So that is what I'm going to say the record was set for, which is touchbacks.
Listen, folks.
Crystal Christie, J.W. Schwartz, Nikki BR01, I'll say B as well.
Lean in real close here. Let's grasp it. Let's own it. Let's seize it. That was Brandon Adams giving a backhanded, underhanded comment to the prolific Jim Chaney offense last year that put the ball in the end zone.
No, I'm not as much of a Chaney hater as some of these people are. I like to play to the crowd sometimes, but I'm not as much of a Chaney hater as some people are.
Brandon, an impressive performance this week, sir.
Thank you, by all means.
Touchbacks in a single season,
By all means.
82 last year, although, a little asterisk here, that record is still in play for most consecutive extra points in a career because he has I think, 154 in a row extra points so far as a Bulldog.
Do you know, does Butler have the mark for extra points?
You got to think Billy Bennett there as well.
Billy Bennett was money for a long time.
Because you got to remember,
Brandon Cateau.
like you were talking about,
Cateau?
in the 80s, teams scored maybe 24 points a game, and that was a huge offensive explosion.
Was it Cateau or Cateau?
Brandon Cateau.
Cateau, excuse me. Sorry, Brandon.
You got Billy Bennett. You've got, don't forget, a guy like Blair Walsh, another guy.
Walsh,
a lot of guys at Georgia. The Georgia kicker U tradition, now it's going to get zerked with the Zirk and everything else, is
Once
very
went
strong.
to a Christmas party, Billy Bennett played the guitar. Very accomplished musician.
What did he play?
I don't remember, just, you know.
Did he play Appetite for Destruction by
He
Guns N'
strummed the
Roses?
guitar, but he's a good musician for sure. All right, good stuff. James Crump giving me some love there. I appreciate that. Let's finish off in high style here. Let's put 5 minutes on the clock. Let's take as many comments as we can. We'll give away our $50 Kroger How About Them Groceries gift card. Really good stuff. We appreciate that. Charles Kaiser says, no, the toe, Cateau. Although Matt Ricavina says it was Cateau. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. Either way, Brad was a good kicker for UGA. Brian McPhail says he missed our top prospects. Jeff, rattle off all 20 again by memory for Brian. He says that he missed them.
Okay.
Actually, let me give you a different question. Crystal Christie says, does Chris Smith's brother have an offer from Georgia? What do you think of it?
I love Tahiri Smith from Hatefield Charter currently. He's just maybe 5'9", 180. I think he's one of the best pure nickel corner prospects in the country. Tough, smart, intelligent, hardworking. I think he's probably the MVP of his 7-on-7 team that wins all those big trophies at all of Cam Newton's events. Tahiri Smith. TJ Smith is a tremendous player. I just don't know if he's big enough for the Bulldogs with what they're looking for.
Sylvester Quarterman Jr. says, what are the chances, speaking of defensive backs, that Nadab Joseph comes back to us after being re-offered by Alabama, apparently?
Well, he wasn't on the also to be considered honorable mention list right now.
Would he be eligible for that? I don't know if we didn't know we put junior college guys on there.
Yeah, we had DJ Daniel, I think, there last year as well. So probably don't usually think of the junior college guys, but Nadab Joseph really seems like Alabama and him are warming up right now.
James Crump says, will we get a commit before the month ends?
Oh, yeah.
You think you'll get one before the weekends?
Let's not go too far.
Dante Edie says, why is Georgia getting in so late on Javon Baker? He's a stud.
I think oversight. I saw that offer, and I'm like, wasn't that done like 2 years ago? I mean, Javon Baker, this is like Georgia waiting to offer a Jaden Hazelwood type receiver this late in his senior season. Javon Baker's really good, and he's been committed to Alabama as long as you've been committed to the blind squirrel, apparently.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Ro Hawkins says, Jeff, who do you like better, a Rick Gilbert or Darnell Washington?
I like Gilbert better. Gilbert's still the more polished season play-right-away prospect. But at 6'7.5" and 250, and I think Darnell Washington is faster than Gilbert. I think the ceiling might be a little higher. And we're talking about top 12 first round versus top 8 first round with a lot of these guys.
Oh boy, Dim on YouTube says, any word on Don Chaney? I know you mentioned him earlier. Dude's a beast. Reminds me of Isaiah Crowell. He and Milton would be a perfect combo. Give us a refresh on your thoughts on Chaney.
Yeah, I think Chaney has received some enhanced interest from Georgia over the last couple of weeks.
Shane Bentley says, who do you believe will end up being the second leading receiver behind Holloman? Pickens, Blaylock, Robertson. I'm going to go Pickens. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to say Blaylock. I'm going to say Blaylock.
I would think Pickens would be the guy. It's going to be funny. I think Pickens is going to end up being a guy that averages over 20 yards per catch.
Yeah.
I think Blaylock's a
his
guy.
catches, he may be like a Randy Moss where his catches just really, really count. He may not lead the league in receptions, but the ones he does get, maybe game breakers.
I see Pickens having a lot of 3 catches for 81-yard type games, and I see Blaylock having a lot of 6 catches for 60-yard type
J.W.
games.
Schwartz asked a funny question. Who do you think is going to commit on July 4th? It's every holiday. Who's the July 4th commitment going to be? That should be right around the time that Kendall Milton could be announcing something. Surely he wouldn't interrupt the cookout. I'm going to be in Florida. I'm going to be on vacation.
I'm just going to wonder. You'll show up on a beach with a Dog Nation hat on if Kendall Milton commits on January 4th.
I'll be doing a Facebook Live from the sand.
Here's the thing I think is
kill me.
curious. I think it's curious about the Kendall Milton timeline. Now, I think it could come anytime after his final official visit. And I'm going to say July 23rd, June 23rd, July 23rd. That kind of feels like the range. But it will be highly interesting if he goes to the opening finals, which are, I think, July 1st.
Okay.
And he goes there as still an undecided recruit. Going to catch a lot of media attention. A lot of inquiring minds will want to know.
Interesting. Hunt and Dad on YouTube says, do you think Lawrence Cager will play? My answer to that is I think he's going to get every chance to because he's got some experience. I think that experience matters. I don't expect him to be one of Georgia's 2 or 3 leading receivers necessarily, but just given the fact that Cager's been on the field a good bit, I do expect him to play.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think we're getting we're putting the 4- and 5-star freshmen ahead of the horse here a lot with the receiver rotation. Don't forget, I know everybody wants me to say Demetrius Robertson, but don't forget the more solid, stable pick there in Tyler Simmons. He's a guy that I can see getting 400, 500, 600 yards in the Georgia offense this year.
Let me get some more over here on Facebook here for a moment. Charles Geiser asked a good one. Who wins more one-on-one battles in practice, Nolan Smith or Andrew Thomas?
Andrew Thomas.
Yeah, the thing about Andrew is he can get those long arms on you. I mean, Nolan's got some moves. Andrew's hard to move off that spot, though.
Now, if you're going to ask me who's going to win more of their one-on-one battles when they're both 24 years old in the NFL, that's a different story. But Andrew Thomas has been there and done that and already started 28 games in the SEC. Can't put Nolan ahead of him that right now.
Robbie McCullough says, which quarterback recruit do you like the most for the 21 cycle?
I like Caleb Williams out of Gonzaga.
Interesting.
Nothing against Blair nothing against Vandegrift, Brock Vandegrift, who I think was just named the 2021 #1 overall quarterback by Rivals.com. I think it's too much overlap between what Carson Beck does and what Brock does potentially for Georgia. I think Caleb would be a new dimension for the Bulldogs.
Can we give Sylvester Quarterman Jr. on Facebook the $50 Kroger How About Them Groceries gift card? I liked his question about Nadab Joseph.
Sylvester Quarterman Jr.
Sylvester Quarterman
might be the
Jr.
first Sylvester to ever bring home that How About Them Groceries gift card.
Congratulations.
Mr. Quarterman, your family's net worth is now $50 greater, and you're going to do a lot of damage with that at Kroger. Look for a Facebook Messenger post from myself or Brandon here, and we'll get that $50 gift card to you.
Hey, thank you all for being with us. Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. I'll see you tomorrow morning for Dog Nation Daily. Jeff's got a lot of good stuff for you coming at dognation.com. Y'all have a great time and great week. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again next week at this time for what's the name of the show again? Before the Hedges.
Before the Hedges.
Kroger. Y'all have a great day, everybody.